prison! You'll go to prison for this!
Prison's for crimes, ma'am. This here's just consequence.
Problem with your ride, ma'am?
You did this! You set traps! You endangered lives! This isn't over. I'll be back with real enforcement!
Step back from that tree. The woman's voice cracked through the calm morning like a gunshot. Birds scattered from the branches. My granddad's coffee paused halfway to his lips. She came charging down our trail dust, flying, high heels slipping on gravel, clutching a clipboard like it was a badge of authority. I froze for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A blue Jeep was still idling crookedly behind her, its tires half on the grass, engine whining like it hated the job. And out stepped this woman mid-40s, tight bun, gold HOA lanyard flashing in the sunlight, staring at us like we were squatters on her front lawn. Granddad Walter didn't move. He'd seen worse things than angry suburban women in his 75 years. Vietnam, a sawmill fire, a lifetime of hard work and people trying to take what wasn't theirs. He just sipped his coffee, eyes calm but sharp, watching her march closer. "You can't build here!" she shouted, stopping 10 feet away and jabbing her pen toward our deer blind. "This is unauthorized construction on community land." I blinked. Community land? Lady, this is private property. Not according to this. She shoved the clipboard at me. Pages full of colored maps and highlighted text trembled in her hands. Sunset Valley HOA jurisdiction extends 2 ridges over. You're in violation of Section 9 non-approved structures within the extended buffer zone. Her perfume hit me before her logic did. Expensive, chemical, completely out of place in the woods. Granddad finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Ma'am, this land's been in my family since 1911. That oak there's got my grandfather's initials carved in it. You're standing on Hendrick soil," she sneered. "That may have been true once, but property lines shift, sir. We have regulations now," she said, regulations like it was divine scripture. Walter tilted his head. "Regulations don't erase deeds, ma'am." The silence after that was heavy, broken only by the wind brushing through oak leaves. Then she scoffed, snapped a photo of the blind, another of my truck, and scribbled something on her clipboard. "Expect a citation," she said, spinning toward her Jeep. "You mean a trespass charge?" I called after her. She ignored me, muttering into a walkie-talkie that didn't even have an antenna. Dust swirled as she sped off, taillights vanishing beyond the pines. Granddad exhaled through his nose and set the thermos down. "Well," he said, "guess we met management. We thought that was the end of it." But Becky Lamont wasn't the kind of woman who left a fight unfinished. 3 days later, at sunrise, the roar of engines echoed through the valley again. 4 vehicles this time, hers leading, followed by 3 SUVs filled with clipboard warriors. They bounced down our narrow trail like they owned it, horns blaring, tires chewing the gravel. I stepped out of the shed, shotgun in one hand, rag in the other. Walter was by the fire pit, turning bacon over an iron pan like it was just another morning. "Morning parade's early today," he murmured. Becky's Jeep fishtailed to a stop so hard it showered our tent with pebbles. Doors flew open. Out came 3 men and a woman, all in matching polo shirts, with the HOA logo embroidered over their hearts. They looked like a tactical team for suburban complaints. "Attention!" Becky barked, raising a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. "This property is now under formal notice for code violations. You have 72 hours to remove all unapproved structures." Walter didn't even glance up. "Coffee's hot," he said softly. She blinked. "Excuse me?" I said. He repeated. "Coffee's hot. You want a cup while you're trespassing?" That earned a nervous chuckle from one of her men, quickly silenced by Becky's glare. She stormed closer, heels crunching against gravel. "You think this is funny? I could have the county fine you $10,000. I stepped forward. "Ma'am, I think you're lost. HOA rules stop 2 miles that way." I pointed toward the ridge. She ignored me and started giving orders. "Document everything. Measure that shed. Photograph the illegal fire pit." Walter watched her, eyes narrowing just a hair. Then he stood up, slow and deliberate, every motion precise. The wind shifted, carrying a faint metallic clink from the old tool shed behind him. "I'll tell you once," he said, tone polite but cold. "You've made your point. Now you'll want to turn those vehicles around before the road teaches you something." Becky planted her hands on her hips. "You're threatening an HOA official?" He smiled faintly. "I don't make threats, ma'am, just observations." They left in a storm of dust, tires spinning like angry wasps. Walter watched until the sound faded, then headed to the shed. Inside, it smelled like oil and cedar. Hanging from the rafters were tools older than me, but he walked straight to the corner, lifted a tarp, and revealed a wooden crate. He set it on the table and pried it open. Railroad spikes, 6 of them, thick, rust brown, heavy enough to drive through stone. He picked one up, turning it between his fingers like a coin. "Used to line the old rail spur," he said, "abandoned in the 42nds. They're still part of this valley." I frowned. "What are you planning?" He didn't answer directly. Some folks listen when you tell them they're wrong. Some need a demonstration. He looked toward the road, and some have to learn from the road itself. Next morning, he worked quietly. While I checked trail cameras, he walked the curve halfway down our trail, the sharp bend by the creek where tires always kiss the edge. I didn't see him carry the crate, but I noticed later the faint, fresh marks in the dirt, small enough to miss unless you were looking for them. By afternoon, the valley was calm again. For 2 days, silence returned until it didn't. Engines, 5 of them this time, roaring like a convoy. I climbed onto the porch. Becky was back, leading her little army. They'd added magnetic decals to their doors, Sunset Valley Patrol. I almost choked laughing. They stopped in formation, tires grinding to a synchronized halt. Becky jumped out first, sunglasses on, clipboard ready. "This is your final warning," she announced, like a general addressing troops. "Remove these illegal structures or face enforcement action." Walter stood beside me, unreadable. "Enforcement action," he echoed. "That's new." Her crew fanned out again, measuring, filming, taking soil samples. It was like watching a badly funded reality show. I caught sight of one guy holding a tape measure upside down. "Ma'am," Walter said after a while, voice steady, "if you're done wasting your morning, I'd appreciate you leaving before something unfortunate happens." "Is that a threat?" "No," he said. "A weather forecast." She rolled her eyes. "We're documenting violations." "Then document carefully," he said, glancing down the trail. "The road's part of the record, too." They finally loaded up, smug and satisfied. Engines revved. Becky's Jeep lurched forward first, her convoy following tight behind. I leaned on the fence post, heart thudding. Walter poured himself another cup of coffee and waited. Then it came the sound. A crack, sharp and final, followed by the hiss of air escaping rubber. Her Jeep swerved, fishtailed, and thudded to a stop, listing hard to one side. The SUV behind her braked too late, clipping her bumper with a satisfying crunch. The rest stopped in a staggered line of confusion. Becky's door flew open. "Sabotage!" she shrieked. "You sabotaged my vehicle!" Walter approached with the calm of a man walking to church. He peered at the flat tire, its sidewall pierced clean through. The spike glimmered in the sunlight, half buried in the gravel. "These old logging roads," he said, shaking his head, "still got plenty of iron from the railroad days. You've got to drive careful out here." Her face went scarlet. You did this on purpose! I'll have you arrested!" "For what?" he asked softly. "Owning land?" The other HOA members stood behind her, shifting awkwardly. None of them dared speak. Walter turned away, heading back toward the camp. "Next time," he said over his shoulder, "bring better tires." We sat by the fire that night, the crickets loud and the stars sharp. He poured 2 cups, handed me one, and stared at the glowing embers. "She'll come back," I said. "Of course," he replied. "Some people always do, but she's learning." "Learning what?" He smiled faintly, eyes glinting in the firelight. That the road remembers. He reached for one of the leftover spikes and turned it slowly in his hands. The metal caught the flames, glowing dull red. Some people learn from words, he said quietly. Some from experience. He set the spike down beside the others, each one lined up like a promise. And some, he murmured, eyes fixed on the dark road beyond the trees, have to learn from the road itself. The morning after Becky's tire met the railroad spike, the woods were quiet again, too quiet. When the valley goes still like that, it's not peace, it's warning. Granddad knew it. He spent the whole day tightening the chain at the gate, checking trail cameras, watching the horizon the way men do when they know trouble isn't finished. I asked him if he thought she'd come back. He just smiled, poured coffee into his dented thermos, and said, "Some folks don't believe a lesson unless it costs them something." He was right. By noon the next weekend, I heard the low growl of engines rolling through the valley, again multiple this time. Not just Becky's blue Jeep, but a convoy. I counted 3 SUVs behind her, dust pluming up from the trail like a storm front. They weren't slowing down. "Guess tuition's due," Walter muttered, setting down his cup. The first vehicle skidded to a stop beside our fire pit. Becky jumped out like she was stepping onto a stage, hair perfect, suit pressed, clipboard raised high. Behind her came 3 men in matching polos embroidered with the HOA crest, each trying way too hard to look official. "Attention!" she shouted, planting herself in front of us. This property remains in violation of multiple community standards. Failure to comply will result in enforcement measures under HOA jurisdiction. Walter tilted his head. "You sure you want to use that word, jurisdiction?" She puffed her chest. "Absolutely." The others fanned out, performing their little pantomime of authority. One measured the deer blind again, another photographed our shed from every angle, and the third crouched to inspect the fire pit like he was analyzing a crime scene. I couldn't help myself. "You folks ever wonder why you don't see any houses out here?" "Quiet," Becky barked. "This is an official inspection." "Official?" Walter said softly. "You mean pretend?" Her nostrils flared. "I'll have the county seize this property if you keep obstructing our work." He smiled faintly. "You can't seize what you don't own, ma'am. And you're about to learn the difference." They stayed half an hour, documenting imaginary violations and muttering legal jargon. When they finally piled back into their vehicles, Walter gave me a look that said, "Watch and remember." Becky revved her Jeep like she was leading a cavalry charge. Gravel sprayed. She shot down the trail, convoy tight behind her. The sound hit us seconds later, a pop, then a metallic crack, followed by the unmistakable hiss of air leaving a tire. The Jeep lurched sideways, a burst of dust and panic. One SUV slammed brakes too late, kissing her rear bumper with a crunch that sent both drivers swearing into the trees. I jogged up the trail. Walter walked, calm, predictable, the way he always did when the world was losing its mind. Becky was standing in the road, eyes wide, hair wild, staring at her shredded tire like it had betrayed her. "This is sabotage!" she screamed. "You did this on purpose! You're both going to jail!" Walter looked down at the flat, squatting there in the dirt with a piece of old metal sticking through it. He crouched, examined it, and smiled. "These old logging roads," he said mildly, "still hiding railroad debris. Surprised more folks don't drive careful." Becky's voice cracked. "That's a spike! You planted it!" "Planted? No, ma'am. Been there since before your HOA existed." He dusted off his hands. "You might want to slow down next time. The road's got a way of teaching impatience." One of her colleagues, tall, nervous, clipboard trembling, leaned close. "Becky, maybe we should just go," she spun on him. "Go? They damaged my property. This is criminal." Walter leaned on his walking stick, gaze calm. "If you think that, you're welcome to call the sheriff." She did. An hour later, a patrol truck rolled down the trail. Deputy Carl. He was 30, maybe, broad-shouldered, polite, and local enough to know exactly whose land this was. When he stepped out, the tension in the air shifted instantly from chaos to quiet authority. "Afternoon, Walter," he said, nodding. "Heard we've got some kind of law enforcement activity out here?" Becky rushed forward, waving her clipboard like it was a warrant. "Officer, thank God. These men have sabotaged our vehicles. They've attacked a legally sanctioned HOA inspection." Carl raised an eyebrow. "HOA inspection?" "Yes, I'm vice president of Sunset Valley Homeowners Association. We have jurisdiction over this area." He looked around at the woods, then back at her. "Ma'am, the nearest HOA boundary is 6 miles east." Her voice faltered. "That's incorrect." He pulled out his tablet, scrolling through property maps. "County records disagree. This here's private land belonging to Walter Hendricks." Becky's face flushed. "Well, we have extended buffer authority." Carl's tone stayed professional but edged toward amusement. "That's not a thing, ma'am." The silence that followed was beautiful. Even the birds seemed to pause to hear her ego deflate. Behind her, one of the men, broad, sweaty, wearing a tactical vest that looked suspiciously like a fishing vest, muttered something about miscommunication. Another was fidgeting with a plastic badge clipped to his polo. It had HOA enforcement printed in Comic Sans. Carl caught it and squinted. "You folks carrying identification?" Becky lifted her badge proudly. "Of course. We're authorized HOA enforcement." He took it from her, turned it over. "Plastic. Toy grade. Something you'd win at a fair." He bit the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. "Ma'am, impersonating law enforcement is a felony in this county. It's not impersonation, it's community service." "Community service doesn't come with badges or radios," he said dryly. That's when I noticed half the neighborhood showing up at the trailhead, farmers, hunters, kids on bikes. News travels fast in small towns, especially when there's drama. Within minutes, a small crowd had formed, phones out, recording everything. The HOA officers started shifting from authoritative to embarrassed. Carl stepped aside, giving Becky one last chance. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you and your team to leave this property immediately." Becky's lip trembled. "You're taking his side?" "I'm taking the law's side," he said, "and the law says you're trespassing." The crowd started laughing, not cruelly, but with the kind of relief people feel when justice finally gets a turn. Someone whispered, "Fake cops got schooled," and the phrase caught like wildfire. Walter stayed quiet through it all. He poured Carl a cup of coffee from his thermos. Steady hands, calm eyes. "Always told her to leave the road alone," he said softly. "Guess she preferred experience." Becky tried to rally one last time, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. "This isn't over. I'll be back with real enforcement." Walter nodded. "I'll leave the gate unlocked, ma'am. Road'll be waiting." As the convoy limped away 2 flats, one cracked rim, a trail of bruised pride, the crowd started dispersing. Still laughing, Carl shook Walter's hand. "You're something else, old man. Never even raised your voice." Walter smiled faintly. "No need to. The road speaks louder." That night, back at camp, I couldn't shake the image of Becky's face when Carl read her the law. She'd looked like a machine, short-circuiting too much pride, not enough grounding. Granddad sat by the fire, staring at the glow of the coals. "She'll come back," he said quietly. "And next time, she won't come alone." I frowned. "You think she's that crazy?" He took a slow sip, eyes never leaving the flames. "Not crazy," he said. "Just the kind of person who can't tell the difference between control and respect. That kind always needs a final lesson." He leaned forward, tossing another log on the fire. Sparks jumped skyward, red against the dark. "Let her bring whoever she wants," he murmured. "The road's got plenty left to teach." The valley was silent again, but this time the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the pause before thunder, the kind of stillness that hums under your skin and tells you the storm isn't done. I looked toward the shed where the railroad spikes sat in their crate, waiting, and for the first time I understood why Granddad never argued, never yelled. He didn't need to. The land spoke for him. And the road, it never forgot a lesson once it was taught. Word travels fast in the countryside. By Monday morning, half the county had already seen the video. Becky Lamont, vice president of the Sunset Valley HOA, screaming at Deputy Carl while holding a broken clipboard and a flat tire. The other half had heard the story from someone who'd been there. It spread faster than wildfire, burning through breakfast tables, gas stations, and feed stores. By the time Thursday rolled around, Becky wasn't just infamous, she was a cautionary tale. But to people like her, embarrassment doesn't bring humility, it brings vengeance. That evening, as the sun bled out over the valley, I found Walter sitting on the porch, sharpening his pocket knife with the calm patience of a man who'd seen storms build before. "You heard about the meeting?" I asked. He nodded. "Sunset Valley HOA. Open session. Word is, she's called a special presentation." "She's really doing this?" He smirked faintly. "Ain't no cure for pride, son. Only consequences." We walked into the community hall just after 6. It was already packed. The folding chairs creaked under the weight of farmers, shop owners, hunters, and curious neighbors who hadn't set foot in an HOA meeting in 20 years. The air buzzed with anticipation, a mixture of outrage and popcorn energy. Becky sat at the head table, flanked by her remaining board members, faces tight with tension, like people realizing they'd signed up for the losing team. She looked different now. Gone was the tactical vest and fake badge. Tonight, she was dressed for war in a navy blue power suit, hair pulled tight, makeup layered thick enough to crack. But the fury in her eyes hadn't changed. The second she saw Walter, her expression twisted. "This is a private HOA meeting," she announced into the microphone, voice brittle. "Non-residents are not permitted." A murmur rippled through the room. Someone laughed. Then a voice rose from the back. Jim Patterson, a retired lawyer who'd spent years fighting HOA overreach. "Actually, Becky," he said, standing, "county statute requires open attendance when non-member properties are under discussion. You sent him notices. You opened that door." Becky's smile wobbled. "Fine, but he can't speak." Walter set his worn leather folder on the table beside her microphone. "Wasn't planning on speech-making, ma'am. Just showing you something real. When Walter speaks, people listen. He didn't raise his voice, didn't gesture. Just opened the folder and slid out the papers one by one. County deed," he said, unfolding a yellowed page marked with 4 generations of signatures. Survey maps from 1911, updated in 67, and again in 04. He held them up to the light. "This valley's ours, always has been." He set the next paper down. A letter from the county attorney's office. "For the record, HOA jurisdiction ends 2 miles from my fence line. Any attempt to enforce rules beyond that boundary is null and void." The room was dead silent except for the hum of the ceiling fans. Even Becky's board members leaned forward, reading the seal on the letter. "You're lying," she blurted. "You forged that." Walter smiled mildly. "You're welcome to verify it with the county clerk. I'll wait." He didn't wait long. Jim Patterson, standing near the projector, nodded. "It's legitimate. County seal. Signed last month. I know the clerk personally." The crowd started to murmur. Becky slammed her hand on the table. "Enough! I am the HOA!" she shouted, voice shrill and cracking. "I decide what's legal in Sunset Valley." For a moment, you could have heard a pin drop. Then laughter broke quiet at first, then growing. A low ripple of disbelief turned into open chuckles. Even some of her own committee members couldn't keep straight faces. Walter waited for the noise to fade. Then he said softly, "That right there's your problem, ma'am. You think titles give power, but real authority doesn't need shouting." Her eyes went wide with rage. "You smug old—" "Careful," Jim interrupted, his voice even. "This meeting is on record." Becky straightened, breath trembling. "Fine. Then let the record show that I will not be intimidated by criminals or hillbillies pretending to own land that doesn't belong to them." Walter chuckled, slow and dangerous. "Pretending? Ma'am, my great-grandfather laid the boundary markers you're standing on. That oak tree with the brass tag, he hammered it in himself. You're not fighting me, you're fighting time." A murmur spread through the crowd again, louder this time. People began whispering, pointing at the map Walter had projected on the screen. The boundaries were clear as daylight. Our land, surveyed, documented, and legally recorded decades before Sunset Valley even existed. Becky's voice wavered. "You don't understand. If I lose this case, our property values, our whole community will collapse." Walter looked at her, pity flickering in his eyes. "Community don't collapse from truth, ma'am. Only from lies too heavy to carry." Someone in the back called out, "She brought fake cops to his land." Another shouted, "I saw the videos." Becky's head snapped toward the audience. "Those were necessary enforcement actions." Jim Patterson cleared his throat. "Actually, Becky, they might qualify as criminal impersonation. I spoke with the sheriff's office. They're reviewing the footage." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, laughter. Becky's hand trembled on the microphone. You can't." Jim adjusted his glasses. "You impersonated law enforcement, led multiple people onto private property, and caused damage to vehicles. You'll want a lawyer." Her face went pale, then purple. She turned toward Walter, shaking. "You think this is over? You think this makes you some kind of hero?" He stood slowly, folding his papers with deliberate care. "No, ma'am," he said. "It makes me a neighbor who's tired of bullies." The meeting dissolved into chaos. People arguing, cameras flashing, someone laughing so hard they dropped their phone. Walter and I slipped through the crowd quietly, leaving Becky red-faced and sputtering behind the microphone. Outside, the night was cool, stars sharp above the ridge. Walter took a long breath and looked at me. "That's one lesson finished," he said. "You think she'll stop now?" He glanced down the dark road leading out of town. "Not yet. Some people don't stop until they've paid in full." We were halfway home when he slowed the truck and nodded toward the moonlit trees. "She'll come again. Pride don't die easy." I stared out the window, thinking about the videos still spreading across town. Becky in her fake badge, shouting about authority while real deputies looked on. Her reputation was gone, but the fury in her eyes earlier told me she wasn't finished. Walter's hands rested easy on the wheel, but his eyes were distant. "When people can't control you," he said quietly, "they'll try to ruin you, but truth don't scare easy either." We pulled into the driveway. The porch light cast a faint glow over the shed. Inside, I could see the shadow of the old wooden crate railroad spikes gleaming faintly in the dark. Walter climbed out, stretched, and stared down the long dirt trail leading into the woods. "Road still there," he murmured, "and it remembers." He turned to me with a small, knowing smile. "If she wants another lesson, son," he said, "the road's ready to teach." By the following week, the valley had gone quiet again. Too quiet. When a place like ours goes silent, it isn't peace, it's preparation. Walter could feel it too. He spent his mornings walking the trail, tightening the gate chain, trimming brush around the bend. He didn't say much, just whistled under his breath like a man setting pieces on a chessboard. "She'll be back," he told me one night by the fire. "This kind of pride doesn't vanish, it reloads." He wasn't wrong. 3 mornings later, just after dawn, the sound came engines. Not one or two, but several, growling in unison like a mechanized pack. Dust rose beyond the ridge, curling over the treetops like smoke from a wildfire. "Guess the storm found its way home," Walter said, setting down his coffee. When the first vehicle crested the trail, my jaw dropped. 5 cars, her blue Jeep in the lead, followed by a pair of black SUVs, a silver pickup, and God help me, a minivan loaded with clipboard commandos. They came barreling down our hunting road like they were invading foreign soil. "Operation Reclaim Authority," Walter muttered, reading the magnetic decals on their doors. "She actually named it." The convoy kicked up a cloud thick enough to blot out the rising sun. I could taste the grit in the air before they even reached camp. Becky's Jeep came to a screeching halt beside the oak tree, tires carving deep ruts into ground that had stood untouched for a century. Doors slammed. Voices shouted orders. And there she was, Becky Lamont, suburban general in full battle regalia, Power suit, flats, HOA lanyard, gleaming like a badge of honor. "Final notice," she announced, bullhorn in hand. "This illegal occupation ends today." Walter didn't move. He just leaned back in his folding chair, pouring another cup from his dented thermos. The steam drifted lazily into the air, untouched by the chaos. "You're trespassing again," he said evenly. "Same as last time." She ignored him and waved her clipboard. "According to Sunset Valley Community Codes, this buffer zone is under our jurisdiction. These non-compliant structures will be removed, and all occupants are hereby ordered to vacate immediately." Her troops fanned out, snapping pictures, unrolling tape measures, even taking soil samples like they were uncovering evidence of a federal crime. The absurdity of it all would have been funny if it weren't happening on our family land. Walter rose slowly, every motion deliberate, unhurried. He adjusted his cap, looked down the trail, then back at her. "Ma'am," he said, voice calm but cutting, "you've got two kinds of roads out here. Ones that take you home, and ones that take you somewhere you don't want to be. You might want to think real hard about which one you're on." Becky smirked. "That sounds like a threat." "No," he said. "That's geography." She turned back to her people, barking orders. They planted an orange plastic fence across the turnaround like they were establishing a new border. Someone even hammered a laminated HOA restricted zone sign into the dirt. I laughed out loud. Couldn't help it. Walter didn't laugh. He just watched, observing the road, the tires, the way the sunlight gleamed off metal left behind decades ago. "Pack your gear," he murmured to me. Show's about to start. By noon, they were done documenting their imaginary crimes. 5 vehicles idled in formation, dust swirling behind them. Becky climbed into her Jeep, bullhorn still in hand. "This is your last chance to comply." Walter tipped his hat. "Appreciate the warning." Engines roared. The convoy rolled out hard, fast, determined to make their exit dramatic. They didn't make it far. At the narrow curve between the oaks, the trail dipped where last week's rain had softened the clay shelf. Becky's front tire hit the edge, slipped, and buried itself to the hub. The Jeep jerked, nose down, engine whining. The SUV behind her braked too late, sliding sideways and bottoming out on the trail crown. The pickup tried to swerve, caught the mud, and fishtailed into the ditch. The minivan came in last, bumping its nose into the tailgate of the pickup with a soft, defeated thunk. Within seconds, the whole convoy was gridlocked. 5 vehicles, 20 feet of chaos. Becky jumped out, heels sinking into the mud. "Sabotage!" she shrieked, pointing at Walter, who was walking toward them at the same unhurried pace he used for Sunday strolls. He looked over the mess with mild interest, like a man appraising storm damage. "Problem with your ride, ma'am?" "You did this!" she howled. "You set traps. You endangered lives." He crouched near the stuck Jeep, tapping one of the exposed rails buried in the dirt. "These old roads can be tricky," he said. "Leftovers from the railroad days. Sharp metal under the surface. They've been here longer than either of us." Her jaw dropped. "This is terrorism. Or maybe just physics," he said softly. Behind her, one of the SUV drivers kicked his flat tire and groaned. "We're not getting out without a tow." Another man was on his phone, waving it uselessly, no signal this deep in the valley. The minivan's passengers had resorted to arguing among themselves about whose idea this was. Walter folded his hands behind his back, surveying the wreckage like a professor grading a failed experiment. "Some roads teach patience," he said. "Others teach respect." Then came the crunch of tires on gravel behind us. A white pickup rolled in, slow, flashing blue lights on its dash. The game warden, he stepped out, clipboard in hand, scanning the scene with that look professionals get when they're trying to process human stupidity. "Morning," he said calmly. "Somebody want to explain why 5 vehicles are stuck on posted private property?" Becky whirled toward him. "Officer, thank goodness! Arrest them! They've sabotaged our vehicles!" He blinked. "Sabotaged?" She thrust her clipboard toward him like a shield. "They planted spikes, dug traps. This is attempted murder." He squatted beside her Jeep, inspecting the mud. These look like old rail pins. Seen 'em plenty in these parts. Road hazards. Maybe shouldn't be driving 30 miles an hour down a private hunting trail." "That's outrageous," she spat. He shrugged. "What's outrageous is trespassing past 6 posted signs and ignoring a locked gate. You folks lost?" Her lips trembled. "We're enforcing community standards." The warden frowned. "You're what?" Walter handed him a folded paper. "Deed. Boundary map. Been in the family 4 generations." The warden studied it for a moment, then nodded. "Looks in order. You folks," he said to Becky's group, "are 1.5 miles outside your HOA boundary, which means you're trespassing." The silence that followed was glorious. Becky looked like she'd swallowed a hornet. Her people stared at the ground. One of them muttered something about following orders. The warden tapped his clipboard. "I'll need names and license plates for my report. You can expect citations in the mail." Walter tipped his hat. "Appreciate you coming out, sir. Would have hated to waste a good afternoon explaining the obvious." The warden chuckled. "You folks have a good day." He turned back toward his truck, leaving Becky and her stranded convoy in a cloud of their own embarrassment. An hour later, tow trucks began arriving. 4 of them, laboring up the muddy trail like rescue boats approaching a shipwreck. The sound of winches and spinning tires filled the valley, accompanied by Becky's muffled rage. Walter and I sat by the fire, watching from a distance. "Expensive day," I said. He nodded. "Education usually is." She shot us one last glare before climbing into the tow truck cab. "You'll regret this, old man," she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Walter took a slow sip from his thermos. "Ma'am," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "I've been dealing with your kind my whole life. Folks who think rules give them power, but power without respect," he paused, "don't last long on these roads." She didn't reply, just slammed the door and disappeared in a swirl of dust. The next few days were calm, but not peaceful. Everyone in town was talking about the convoy, the warden's report, the spectacle of 5 HOA vehicles hauled out like trophy kills. But beneath the laughter, something darker lingered. Becky's pride had taken a mortal wound, and Walter knew wounded pride was the most dangerous kind. "She'll double down," he said quietly one evening, staring into the fire. "When people lose their illusion of control, they'll burn everything trying to get it back." I glanced toward the shed, where the crate of spikes rested under its tarp. "You think she'll come again?" He didn't answer right away, just leaned back, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "She will," he said finally. "And when she does, she won't be pretending anymore." The woods were silent around us. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Walter's voice was barely a whisper. "The road's not finished teaching." The valley had gone quiet again, but this time it wasn't the calm before a storm, it was the silence of something calculating. Walter could sense it the way old hunters feel a shift in the wind. He'd been stacking firewood when he said it, almost casually. "She's not done." He was right. The next week, news trickled through town. Becky Lamont had been stripped of her HOA title. The board had voted her out after the warden's report went public. 5 trespassing citations, 1 formal warning for impersonating authority, and an avalanche of community ridicule. For most people, that would have been the end. For Becky, it was the spark. 2 days later, a rumor reached the feed store Becky was forming a task force, some kind of private security detail to reclaim what she called community integrity. By Saturday, she was recruiting. By Monday, she had a team. 6 vehicles this time, men in camo, women with clipboards, and one guy with a tactical vest so tight it looked like he was auditioning for a low-budget war movie. They called themselves Sunset Valley Protective Services. Walter saw the convoy before I did, dust plume rising behind the ridge, like a signal fire. He didn't flinch. Just finished his coffee, set the mug down, and said, "Guess tuition's due again." I followed his gaze to the old wooden crate near the shed. The spikes were gone. What he'd done with them, I didn't know, but the look in his eyes said this lesson was going to be final. The first vehicle hit the trail around noon. I'll give them this, they looked the part. Light bars flashing, radios squawking, boots crunching on gravel. They poured out like soldiers storming a beach, except this was private land, and their enemy was a 75-year-old man with a thermos and a folding chair. Becky stepped out of the lead jeep like a general descending from a tank. She wore combat pants, a jacket covered in meaningless patches, and a headset mic she didn't need. The bullhorn was still there, slung across her shoulder like a weapon. "Attention!" Her amplified voice blared through the trees. "This compound is hereby under seizure by authorized security personnel. Vacate immediately." Walter didn't move. He was sitting by the fire pit, turning bacon on the skillet, like she hadn't just declared martial law on his property. "Ma'am," he said, calm as a sunrise, "you sure you want to make this your hill?" "Enough games," she barked. "We have jurisdiction. We are here to restore order." "Order?" He raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're not here to find chaos?" She turned red. "You're resisting enforcement." "No, ma'am," he said, standing. "I'm respecting education." The security team spread out, waving metal detectors and cameras like props from a play. One of them tripped over a root and dropped his radio. Another was arguing about whether their map app was offline. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pathetic. Becky strutted behind them, narrating her fantasy through the bullhorn. "Document everything. These are illegal fortifications. Environmental hazards. Will file under emergency jurisdiction." Walter leaned toward me and whispered, "She's talking like the road can hear her." Then louder, "Ma'am, you might want to slow down." "Why?" she snapped. "Because the road don't like noise." For 30 minutes, they documented nonsense, measuring distances that didn't matter, photographing the same stump 6 times, pretending they were building a case. When they finally loaded up to leave, I felt that familiar dread crawl up my spine. Walter just adjusted his hat and said, "Showtime." The engines roared to life. 10 tons of arrogance rolled down the trail at once, tires spitting gravel, radios crackling with self-congratulation. Becky's voice echoed through the bullhorn. "Mission complete. Area secured." Then came the sound. A pop. Then another. Then 3 more. Quick and sharp, like firecrackers in a canyon. The convoy jolted. The lead jeep lurched sideways, tires folding under its weight. The SUV behind swerved to avoid it, but the trail was too narrow. Metal crunched, glass shattered, curses flew. The third vehicle tried to reverse, tires spinning, but the road behind was no safer. Pops echoed through the valley, one after another, until the air was filled with the hiss of deflated pride and rubber. Within 2 minutes, 6 vehicles sat dead in the road, their expensive tires bleeding air into the dust. Becky stumbled out, hair wild, face pale. "Sabotage!" she shrieked through the bullhorn. "This is terrorism! Call the FBI!" Walter stepped out of the trees with perfect timing, thermos in one hand, shovel in the other. He looked around at the chaos like he was grading homework. "Looks like y'all found the soft spots in the trail," he said mildly. "Must have been all that speed." "You did this," she screamed. "You'll go to prison for this." He tilted his head. "Prison's for crimes, ma'am. This here's just consequence." Her voice cracked. "You planted spikes." He knelt beside the ruined tire, pointing at the dull metal lodged deep in the tread. "Railroad iron," he said. "Been part of this valley since before your grandparents were born. The road just remembers what passes over it." Her army was falling apart. One man was trying to use duct tape on a shredded sidewall. Another had a flatbed radioing base command that didn't exist. The rest stood frozen, staring at Walter like they were finally realizing this wasn't a movie. Then the first townsfolk arrived. Word had spread fast again. Someone had seen the convoy go in. Now trucks were parking along the ridge, people walking down with folding chairs and phones. A familiar voice called out, "Afternoon, Walter." It was Deputy Carl stepping from his cruiser with a grin. "Heard the HOA's holding another parade?" Walter tipped his hat. "Guess they didn't like their grades from last lesson." Carl surveyed the scene, whistle low. "Looks like the road handled things fine without me." Becky spun on him, bullhorn trembling. "Arrest him." This is assault on law enforcement. Carl raised an eyebrow. You're law enforcement now? She faltered. Private authority, sanctioned by who, ma'am? He interrupted. Because I don't see any jurisdiction badges here. What I do see are 6 vehicles trespassing and about a dozen folks impersonating security. The crowd laughed. Becky's voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. You all think this is funny? I'll sue every one of you. Walter stepped closer, quiet but firm. You've been shouting since the day you arrived, ma'am. Maybe try listening for once. Listening to what? She spat. He pointed to the road. To the land. It's been telling you where you don't belong. The crowd went still. For a moment, even Becky seemed to hear it. The hiss of tires dying, the wind whispering through the pines, the slow exhale of the earth reclaiming quiet. Walter turned to Carl. Mind filing your report? I think class is dismissed. Carl chuckled. Happy to, Professor. By the time the tow trucks came, half the county had gathered. Phones out, cameras rolling. Kids on bikes cheered every time another flat got winched up the trail. Walter sat by the fire pit again, unbothered, sipping coffee while history wrote itself around him. Becky stood by the lead jeep, mascara streaked, shouting into her dead radio, You think this is over? This is war. Walter didn't even look up. Ma'am, the war ended the moment you started believing rules made you bulletproof. She froze, eyes glinting with rage. You'll regret this. He smiled faintly. Maybe, but the road won't. When the last tow truck disappeared and the dust finally settled, the valley went quiet again. Only the smell of burnt rubber and wet clay lingered. I turned to Walter. You planned all that, didn't you? He shrugged. Didn't have to plan much. Roads, remember. Gravity does the rest. I looked back toward the trail now littered with tire shreds, mud, and broken pride. You think she'll come back? He sipped his coffee, eyes distant. Not in a vehicle she wants to keep. Then he glanced toward the shed, where a single old spike rested on the workbench, freshly polished. Still, he said softly, might need one more lesson. Some people learn slow. The fire crackled. The night grew quiet again. And somewhere far down the trail, a single piece of metal gleamed under the moonlight, patient, waiting. The road, as always, remembered. The next morning, the valley smelled like rain, mud, and justice. The air was heavy, damp with the echo of everything that had just happened. The convoy's tire tracks still scarred the trail like bruises on the land. Bits of rubber, twisted hubcaps, and a single abandoned clipboard lay scattered among the leaves. Walter sat on the porch, polishing his pocket knife with slow, rhythmic strokes. Well, he said almost to himself, I reckon the road's done teaching for a while. But the road wasn't the only one keeping score. By midday, the story had spread beyond our county line. Someone had uploaded footage from the spectacle, Becky screaming terrorism through a bullhorn, 6 vehicles immobilized on a private trail, and Walter standing calm amid the chaos, coffee cup in hand. Local news anchors called it the Great HOA Spike Disaster. Reporters flooded the valley, narrating over drone footage of stranded SUVs like it was a war zone. Everywhere you looked, the story was the same. Retired veteran defends property rights from rogue HOA. Suburban authority meets country logic. Woman leads militia onto private land, learns a hard lesson. Walter hated the attention. He wasn't built for fame. He just wanted quiet. But in a world starving for poetic justice, his kind of silence made headlines. By Tuesday, the county attorney's office announced formal charges. Becky Lamont, criminal trespass, conspiracy to harass, and impersonation of law enforcement. The so-called private security team faced similar fates, each of them looking suddenly very small without their tactical vests and bravado. The sheriff's statement to the press was simple. When someone mistakes authority for ownership, the law sets them straight. Becky, of course, blamed everyone but herself. In court filings, she claimed to be the victim of a sustained harassment campaign led by rural extremists. Her lawyer looked like he'd aged 10 years in 1 week. The HOA board issued an official apology to Walter, complete with embossed stationery and the phrase, "Unfortunate misunderstanding." But everyone knew the truth. It was cowardice disguised as courtesy. The civil suits came next. 3 law firms volunteered to represent Walter pro bono. They called it a public service. He called it a waste of paper. Still, when the settlement checks came, even he couldn't hide the small smile. The exact figure was sealed, but rumors spread faster than ink. Enough to rebuild the shed. Enough to send every great-grandchild to college. Enough, maybe, to buy Becky's house if he'd wanted to. He didn't. Walter didn't believe in revenge that left footprints. He preferred lessons that stayed invisible, lessons the road could whisper to whoever needed them next. The fallout hit Sunset Valley like a hammer. Insurance companies dropped coverage. HOA meetings turned into ghost towns. Homeowners demanded audits, accountability, resignations. For months, you couldn't drive through that neighborhood without hearing whispers of that woman who tried to seize a hunting camp. Becky's name became shorthand for arrogance. Her neighbors started filing complaints about her own property, grass too long, mailbox too tall, unapproved paint color. It was poetic justice. Her own rules weaponized against her. Within 6 months, she sold the house and vanished. Some said she moved 2 counties over. Others said she joined a wellness retreat to rediscover balance. But folks around here had a simpler explanation. The road finally caught up. Meanwhile, Walter's story grew into legend. They wrote articles, made videos, even memes. His calm stare beside her screaming face captioned, "The road teaches." The local hardware store started selling Walter's original railroad spikes, polished and packaged as authentic boundary markers. Each one came with a small tag that read, "Respect is free, lessons aren't." People came from neighboring towns to visit the trail, calling it the line that stood. We had to post new signs just to remind them it was still private property. Walter didn't charge anyone to look, but he always said the same thing. Take a picture if you want, just don't forget to look where you're standing. Deputy Carl got promoted that fall. Sergeant, then lieutenant. He started using Walter's case as an example in training, teaching young officers about property rights, restraint, and the value of patience. He'd tell rookies, sometimes the law's just gravity with paperwork. Every so often, he'd stop by the porch with a thermos of his own. You ever think about running for office, Walter? Walter would laugh. Politics is for folks who like talking. I'm more of a listening man. Seasons passed. Autumn came back the way it always did. Gold leaves, cold mornings, deer tracks by the creek. We rebuilt the deer blind that winter. Same spot, same oak tree watching over it like it had for 4 generations. The valley healed itself. The noise faded. The road grew quiet again. But some things had changed. People in town started looking at no trespassing signs differently, not as challenges, but as boundaries with stories behind them. The HOA crowd learned that power written on paper means nothing when it meets roots older than concrete. And me? I learned that real strength doesn't come from shouting, it comes from standing still when the world tries to push you off your ground. One evening, months after the trials ended, I found Walter by the fire. The air smelled of pine smoke and coffee. He was carving something into a small piece of oak. "What's that?" I asked. He smiled. "A reminder." He held up the plaque. The words were simple. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. He nailed it to the post by the trailhead, right above the chain. Below it, the old boundary marker gleamed faintly in the fading light. The road beyond looked calm, again innocent, almost. But I knew better. That dirt wasn't just road anymore. It was memory. Now, years later, people still ask me about that week, about Becky, about the spikes, about the legend of the quiet old man who never raised his voice but won the loudest war. I tell them the same thing every time. He didn't win with anger. He didn't win with lawyers. He just let the road teach the lesson. Because out here, the land remembers everything, every step, every mistake, every ounce of arrogance ground into dust. And if you listen long enough, you can still hear it. The whisper of old iron under the earth, patient, permanent, waiting for the next fool who thinks power is louder than respect. The old spike still sits on Walter's table, cleaned and ready, a quiet relic of a noisy war. Not a weapon, not a trophy, just a reminder. The fire flickers across its surface, catching the gleam of time and consequence. Walter's words echo in my head every time I walk the trail. Some people learn from books, some from experience, and some he'd glance down that long dirt road with a faint smile. Some people have to learn from the road itself,